Dia Div, agus fáilte go dtí terraincogweirdo muchairdos. Hello and welcome to Terra Incogweirdo, my friends. Thank you so much for coming out today for the premiere of episode 30, The Sanguine History of Lep Castle, Part 2, Paranormal Activity. Last week's video about the history gave you all the information that you're going to need to understand about the hauntings and who these spirits might be. So let's get into it. But before we go haunting, I would really like to thank all of you beautiful Incogweirdos who showed up at last week's premiere. Be you a chatter or a lurker, your presence is very much appreciated by both myself and my lovely moderator, the amazing Purple Mommy. We love talking to each other, but we would also like to talk to you guys, so join in today in the chat room, wherever it is, to the side or below or wherever. We get really excited when other Incogweirdos chime in. Okay, so let's get going. So the first thing I wanted to do was to try to establish if there were any hauntings on the property of Lep Castle that could be related to this claim that Lep was a druid ritual site. So I went to archaeological sites and I found this map, Heritage Data Map Historic Environment Viewer, shows historic structures located all over Ireland, and in this photo we are centered in the area of Lep Castle. Lep is the black dot, the blue dots indicate outbuildings, and the red dots are sites of ring forts, castle towers, megalithic tombs, etc. Okay, so in the area of Lep, we have archaeological sites of Ras, and there is one, which is, by the way, it's a ring fort, and there's one directly across the street here. Lep is on Route 421 in County Offaly in the center of Ireland. Okay, so this Rath right here is right across the lane from Lep. Right, and also we find up here 1.3 kilometers north of Lep a megalithic burial site, okay, in Ballywilliam. So that's super close. And so although I was here, hang on a minute, I think I have a, yeah, there we go. Here's the where are you now? There you are. Okay, here is the site in the megalithic site in Ballywilliam. There it is, right there. Okay. So I was unable to find any direct proof of druid rituals being conducted on the site at Lep. I would assume that such a thing would happen on the rock outcroppings. However, the age of the archaeological findings suggests that the area was inhabited within the period of time in Ireland's history when Druids were a strong part of the culture. Accordingly, while it's probable that the Druids were present and engaging in typical ritualistic events in the life of the clan, I was unable to locate any direct evidence of specific rituals being conducted at the site of Lep. I searched for any reports of apparitions or paranormal activity of any kind on the grounds of Lep, which I reason would be more likely attached to inhabitants of the area prior to the construction of the keep. However, I was unable to find any incidences reported on the grounds which did not seem to directly correlate to structures that are existent right now on the property. The only potential exception to this being that the present-day owner, Sean Ryan, claims to have heard chanting and his name being called from outside of the castle. And I have read in more places that chanting can be heard from outside of the castle. However, you have to remember that there was a priest's house like attached to Lep Castle, which we'll get into that later. So, is this, what kind of chanting are we talking about? Was it Latin? What kind of chanting? It would be good to know if the people could decipher the language of the chanting that they were hearing. Be more attentive when you're experiencing a haunting. No problem, right? Okay. So also, you're going to find in a couple different places, and I think people probably picked this information up off of lep.net, which is the official website run by the Ryans for the castle, but it's stated on that website that the Lep is situated over the crossroads of two ley lines. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about that. So this is the only map I could find. Believe me, I searched so hard to find like an accurate map of ley lines in that area of Ireland, but this was literally the best I could find. And it's what it's doing is it's linking up lines between important archaeological sites on Ireland. Okay, so posited by Alfred Watkins in the early 20th century, ley lines are said to be invisible energetic pathways which ancient civilizations built structures across the globe. So it's supposed it's like this energetic grid that encompasses the globe, and supposedly the ancients were able to detect these lines, and they built their important structures along these lines. Thus, today, this was how Alfred Watkins discovered it, by looking at the topography in his home county of, I believe it was Hertfordshire. Please, I apologize if that is wrong, but I believe it was Hertfordshire in England. So here is a map of some supposed ley lines in Ireland. Now, what I can kind of figure from sort of, overlaying a present-day map over this line right here from Knock Anya up to Macha. Okay, this line right here is the closest to where Lep would be. Lep would be somewhere around here. So, given this map, it is indeed possible that Lep is laying on an energetic ley line. Now, does this potentially boost the potentiality for hauntings in the area? I guess that is possible. And but remember that ley lines are considered unsupported pseudoscience, so you guys go ahead and assimilate that information as you will. And something else I was kind of thinking about. Oh wait, I think I have a picture of Alfred. There you are. Alfred tending the bees. Look at all these bees up here. It's crazy. Okay, Alfred's tending the bees. But something that I have thought about a lot with Lep and is the stone that it's built from. And if the stone tape theory is correct, then I would think castles would be a great candidate for being excellent containers of stone tape information. So perhaps that could also be part of the reason why castles and Lep in particular are considered to be, Lep in particular is considered to be extremely haunted. Okay, so let's talk about the elemental, because that's probably the most famous incident of paranormal activity on LEP. This is just, sorry, I'm kind of in the way here, but this is a drawing that I did in preparation for getting my elemental cuff tattoos. Here, turn it over. It's a little harder for you to see it, but I was just researching symbols that would link up to the elements, and I just thought, you guys might be interested in this. I ended up going with these Tibetan symbols on the top in combination with the platonic solids that you see along the bottom. And I guess part of the reason that I put this up was to really bring home the point that elemental spirits are spirits that they're, how do I describe it? They're the collective consciousness of the energy of whichever element they represent. So these are spirits that predate humanity. They're not like ghosts. These are spirits of megalithic, ginormous, world-encompassing elemental forces. They don't have human sensibilities, and they're incredibly powerful and intense. Some people, when they describe the elemental of LEP, sort of just describe an elemental as being an ancient spirit, which I think is just not very descriptive and maybe a little bit misleading. So that's kind of why I'm just showing you this picture, to hone into the fact that we're talking about an elemental properly is the spirit of an element, okay? All right, so let's look at this is the interior layout of LEP Castle. This diagram is found on let.net. So Mildred Darby reports of an entity that have come to be known as the elemental, and it has increased the fame of LEP Castle worldwide. Let's begin with Mildred's accounts in her own hand. This report comes from the December 1908 Occult Review article, and I wanted you to see this because they talk a lot about this area right here, which is the gallery. Okay? All right. The article was called Kilman Castle, a House of Horror, because Mildred just changed all the name of the castle and the name of the people, because she didn't want any notoriety. She didn't want people showing up at her castle asking for a tour. Unlike the Ryans, who welcome people to come and take a tour. Okay. So, 1908, Occult Review article, Kilman Castle, a House of Horror. Mildred Darby writes, "Suddenly, 2 hands were laid on my shoulders. I turned round sharply and saw, as clearly as I see you now, a gray thing standing a couple of feet from me, with its bent arms raised as if it were cursing me." Okay, so that kind of indicates to me that it was sort of humanoid in form. "I cannot describe in words how utterly awful the thing was. Its very undefinableness," is that even a word, Mildred? "Undefinableness, rendering the horrible shadow more gruesome. Human in shape," okay, there you go, "a little shorter than I am," and Mildred didn't appear to be much more than like 5'3" or 5'4", "I could just make out the shape of big black holes like great eyes and sharp features. But the whole figure, head, face, hands, and all, was gray, unclean, bluish gray, something of the color and appearance of common cotton wool, but oh, so sinister, repulsive, and devilish. My friends who are clever about occult things say this is what they call an elemental. The thing was about the size of a sheep, thin, gaunt, and shadowy in its parts. Its face was human, or to be more accurate, inhuman, in its vileness, with large holes of blackness for eyes, loose, slobbery lips, and a thick saliva-dripping jaw sloping back suddenly into its neck. Nose it had none, only spreading cancerous cavities, the whole face being a uniform tint of gray. This, too, was the color of the dark, coarse hair covering its head, neck, and body. Its forearms were thickly coated with the same hair, so were its paws. That's an interesting word. Large, loose, and hand-shaped. And it sat on its hind legs. One hand or paw was raised, and a claw-like finger was extended, ready to scratch the paint. Its lusterless eyes, which seemed half decomposed and looked incredibly foul, stared into mine, and the horrible smell which had before offended my nostrils, only 100 times intensified, came up to my face, filling me with a deadly nausea. I noticed the lower half of the creature was indefinite and seemed semi-transparent at least. I could see the framework of the door that led into the gallery through its body. So I'm guessing that Mildred was probably in one of these rooms, like up here, looking out into the gallery, and that is where she saw it. Now, that description has a lot of information sort of counteracts each other, like hands, paws, hind legs, arms. It's just kind of, sometimes it sounds like she's describing a human, and then sometimes it sounds like she's describing, some kind of half man, half beast. It's a little hard to decipher, at least for me anyway. Okay. So let's talk about Mildred's clever friends, shall we? My friends who are clever about occult things say it is what they call an elemental. Well, I don't think Mildred's friends were all that clever. Elementals, as I discussed previously, are spiritual embodiment of the planet's natural elemental forces. And my personal experience with elementals, which I have discussed in previous videos, in all of my experiences with them, I've never seen them shapeshift into a human form. However, I have witnessed them appear as a particulate yet animate cloud, and something like this has been reported at more than once. I've also seen them take possession of humans, but I have never seen them literally manifest in a humanoid form. It doesn't mean that they don't. All I can say is, in my personal experience, I've never seen that. Given Mildred's description, as well as other descriptions of this entity, I believe it to be the spirit of Sean O'Carroll, the first prince of Eel to rule at Lep, who died of leprosy in 1498. The descriptions closely match a human suffering from the ravages of leprosy. His ghost could very well manifest with the accompanying symptoms of rotting putrid flesh, falling off the bone, gray scaly skin, black holes where the eyes and the mouth should have been, as well as the smell of decomposition. This following account is given as a response letter to the December 1908 article by Mildred Darby, published in Occult Times. Accordingly, we are given to understand that this account was witnessed by an acquaintance while staying at Lep. I saw your eyes fixed upon something above our heads, and the next minute my own eyes were filled by the sight of a thing in the gallery looking down at us. So I'm guessing they're talking about the minstrel's gallery, but you can't be certain because they're not being specific. There was plenty of light from the lamps in the hall and the one above on the wall at the corner of the gallery for every one of us to see quite plainly the gray-colored figure about the height of a small grown-up person looking down at us. I thought I could ever forget the sight of that gray figure with dark spots like holes in its head instead of eyes, standing with gray arms folded on the gallery railing, looking down on us. Then, just as he put foot on the gallery, interesting, the thing that he saw there that we were watching suddenly faded out of sight. The thing did not move, only became less and less visible until it vanished. So let me go back there. Just then, as he put foot on the gallery, okay, I guess he means the person is saying just as one of the humans in the room put their foot on the gallery, then the elemental faded away out of sight, or what they call the elemental. Okay, let's take another. Oh, look at that. All right, so this is a picture of the gallery before the burning in 1922, and I really cannot tell. I mean, clearly I think what they're doing here is they're trying to give you a picture of where the elemental was standing and what pose it was standing in. And, given the age of this photo, I think it's uber creepy. I love it. Okay, so the following is a letter sent from Mildred Darby to Sydney Carroll. Check it out. The Darbys and the Carrolls are writing to each other. All right. Well, they were definitely related by this time. Okay, so here we go. On the 25th November 1915, okay, so this is pre-burning, two of our servants, knowing the master would be late. Okay, wait, I just got to stop here a minute. The master is Jonathan Darby, Mildred's husband, and let me just say that in my research, I found out that this guy didn't seem like he had a whole bunch of fans. It seemed that he was very ill-tempered and violent, and Mildred didn't like it when he was around, and the kids were afraid of him, and also he had no tolerance for the paranormal. Why he married a gothic writer of horror, I do not know. But he had very little tolerance for it, which is going to show up, as we go further. Just wanted you to know a little bit about Jonathan. Okay, so on the 25th November, 1915, two of our servants, knowing the master would be late and that I was driving that afternoon, had invited friends, 2 soldiers from the barracks at Burr, distant the other side 6 miles. They came rather late, and my husband came home early, so the visitors had to be kept out of his sight in the lower regions of one of the wings, the priest's house, and were unable to be shown the center tower of very lofty hall. So I guess some of the maids invited 2 cutie soldiers over, because I'm sure by then the reports of the hauntings were widespread, and I guess the girls wanted to get a scare for the guys, and maybe they would go outside and cuddle later. I don't know. Seems like that was a setup. Okay, back to the letter. At 7:15, my husband and I went up to dress for dinner. My room in extremity of the house from the kitchens. his dressing room next door to me. Whilst dressing, I was startled by a loud yell of terror-stricken male and female voices coming apparently from the hall, and ran out to see the cause. My husband was out ahead of me. At his heels, I passed through the corridor of the wing and onto the gallery wing. The gallery wing rounds two sides of the hall. 2 lamps on gallery, 2 more in hall below. On the gallery, leaning with hands resting on the rail, I saw a thing. Alright, so this is what they're trying to capture here. And half turning, let fly a volley. Sorry. I saw the thing, the elemental, and smelt it only too well. At the same moment, my husband pulled up sharply about 10 feet from the thing, and half turning, let fly a volley of abuse at me, ending up with, "Dressing up a thing like that to try and make a fool of me, and now you'll say I've seen something, and I have not seen anything, and there is nothing to see or ever was." The last speech, without a pause, begun waving one hand at the thing, end up by stalking back to his dressing room, still abusing me for trying to give him fright. As he was speaking, the elemental grew fainter and fainter in its outline until it disappeared. By the sounds from my husband's room, I judged he was employed, as I was myself, in preparing an empty spot for our coming dinner. Okay, people, does that mean he was vomiting? I need to read it to you one more time, and you tell me what you think. By the sounds coming from my husband's room, I judged he was employed as I was myself in preparing an empty spot for our coming dinner. What else would that be? God, that's so weird. Maybe that was common. I have no idea, but how bizarre. He never made any inquiry as to the yell that called us both out, and from that day to this has not mentioned the incident to me. I heard from our servants that when we went to dress for dinner, they had brought their friends just to show them the hall, when all 4 had suddenly seen and smelt the elemental looking down at them from the gallery. We all got such a churn, we couldn't help letting out a bawl and then fled to the servants' corners, where all 4 of us were very sick. This is the second time we've had nausea in relation to seeing the elemental. The 2 mates had letters necessitating that they go home the next day, and they did not return. Okay, so there's a lot of crazy stuff in that letter. Very interesting. Okay, let me see it. So I believe that this is the main stairway, and that this here is the access to that minstrel's gallery that I told you about earlier. So in doing this research, it was kind of hard for me to not notice that 2 of the contemporary sightings ascribed to the elemental both took place on the day of my birth. Both of them are dated June 18th, one in 2002 and another in 2006. I don't know what that's about, but I certainly found it weird. What do you guys think? Coincidence? Synchronicity? Why am I so drawn to Lep Castle? I don't know. I did have a past life where I was a soldier in the company of Brian Boru. And Brian Boru is claimed to be a descendant of the McMahon clan, so maybe I was one of the McMahons that was murdered and thrown into the oubliette. I don't know, but I have some kind of weird connection with Lep. It draws me very, very deeply. So, okay, 2 of these events took place on my birthday. Here's the first one. In 2002 account, a cinematographer from a nearby TV station reported an encounter during a visit to the castle while they were filming for a local show. So, while ascending the old stairs that give access to the battlements, the individual saw movement at a corner at about 10 feet ahead. He dropped his camera down and could see with his own eyes a glow emanating from, then fading back around the corner, which he thought to be an after effect from his UV light. As he moved forward in the direction of the glow, he experienced an odd weakening of his limbs. And here is his encounter given in his own words. Suddenly, this mass of white-like mist raced around the corner like a bowl. Even the rubbish on the floor scattered as it approached at speed. The passage was tight, and I turned to my left to try and get out, but it was too late. I felt the pain as if something had just pierced under my right rib cage and went all the way through to the back. This startled me a little, and we proceeded to arrange shooting in the cellars. The audio refused to tape again in the cellars, and I felt really odd. I was sweating heavily. I became very weak and drowned in dread. Right after the incident in the tunnel, it felt as if a hole in my chest had been punctured on a spiritual level, and my life was seeping out onto the stones. In order to describe it and let the reader understand, they would have had to have experienced a large blood loss at some time in their lives. As they felt the blood drain, this weakness would become prominent. In other words, they were experiencing the onset of death. I was dying. Well, holy crap. Now that to me sounds a lot more like an elemental. The mist and all of the ensuing physical symptoms, which I am going to talk about in a little bit here, but that very much does indeed to me sound like an elemental, and I'm just wondering if, we're not talking about different phenomena here. Maybe the thing that, the thing that hangs out in the gallery and leans over the railing, maybe that's the ghost of Sean O'Connor. Sean O'Carroll. I'm so sorry. And maybe this mist that gives people intense illness symptoms, maybe this is actually an elemental. Okay, so I think we have, spiral staircase looking down. Okay, so another June 18th encounter, ostensibly by a friend of the Ryans who was staying over at Lep. Okay, so June 18th, 2006, in this person's own words. I looked into the darkness of a corridor that exited the spiral stairway. I became aware of the smell of sulfur. It was as if boxes and boxes of matches had suddenly been lit at once. I looked at my friend who had taken me to visit Lep Castle. He could also smell the sulfur. I stared into the darkness of the corridor and had the impression that a beast like a bear or a lion was staring back at me. The tension was rising like a ticking time bomb. My friend then closed the door and said, "To let sleeping dogs lie," meaning sometimes you just have to leave things alone. He was a friend of Sean Ryan, and I certainly did not want to disrespect either of them by stirring up the elemental. Okay, well, it's interesting that he describes feeling like there was a beast in the shadow staring back at him, and the other guy described it like a bull coming at him. And I have heard people who describe this charging mist, which I've read about this and heard about it many times, but people often describe it as being like a bull or an elephant or like a horse charging at them, just some big animal. It's very interesting. Okay, so let's talk about physical harm caused by the elemental. So the symptoms that people have when they come in contact with the elemental mirror symptoms of serotonin hyperfunction syndrome, okay? Now, this is usually caused by drug overdose or drug interaction, but obviously it's being caused here by confrontation with a paranormal force or entity. So some of the symptoms we have are headache, fast or uneven heart rate, feeling restless, agitated, or confused, seizures, unconsciousness, high fever, shivering and sweating, diarrhea, muscle tremors, spasms, or stiffness. Also, electrical charge to hair and skin. Mildred Darby described similar symptoms in the early 1900s, as did the two reports that I just read to you. The two June 18th reports, both talk about several of these symptoms. Okay, so Mildred Darby described that, quote, I felt every hair on my head separate and move, for my flesh all over my body and scalp crept, and every hair on my head stood straight on end. The absolute weakness that came over me, the seeming cessation of the pulses of life, the grip in the heart and brain, the deadly numbness which rendered me incapable of thought, word, or action when I first saw that awful beast. So, this is like, this list over here is really short, but like not being able to talk is also another symptom of this. And, this is a very serious condition that can lead to coma and death. There's no fooling around with serotonin hyperfunction syndrome. It is no bueno. There's several more incidences involving the entity known as the elemental, and it's possible that these instances can be ascribed to more than one phenomena, as I discussed. So what do you think, Incogweirdos? Is it the ghost of the first Prince of Eel who ruled at Lep Castle, Sean Uchero, the plague victim? Is it a half-human, half-goat or sheep, which they call it? When they see it like that, they call it it. Possibly demonic. Is it an entity that manifests as a particulate cloud that can induce serotonin syndrome if it touches you? Or is it all of these things manifesting in different ways? Or are these different things? Are these all different instances of distinct paranormal activity? I would think that we could delineate the cloud from the gray scaly guy. I feel pretty confident in separating those as two different forms of paranormal activity. That's just my take, people. Okay? Alright, let's move on, shall we? From the elemental to the Bloody Chapel. Here we go. This is the entrance to the Bloody Chapel. Part 1, I recounted the legend of how the Bloody Chapel got its name. If you recall, in approximately 1541, Thaddeus, priest and heir of Ferrigananum, was murdered by his brother Terraincogweirdo, the One-Eye, in the chapel. There are several reasons posited for this murder, and please reference Part 1 for the entire story. But what is certain is that Terra ran his brother through with a sword, and Thaddeus bled out and died on the altar. The figure of a priest has been seen standing on numerous occasions and locations inside the castle proper, in this stairwell, inside the castle proper, okay, in the stairwell below the chapel, and leaving the chapel via the western door to the bartizan, which is an overhanging corner turret. This is the door to the oubliette. I don't know where the door to the bartizan is. Maybe it's over here. I'm not sure. Throughout the period of Darby residence, as well as after the 1922 burning when no one was living at Lep, and all the way up to the present-day habitation of the Ryans, bright lights have been reported streaming from the windows of the bloody castle. Apparently, the Ryans get calls from their neighbors fairly frequently. What are you guys doing up there? Nothing. That part of the castle hasn't been restored. Okay, let's see. So, that's a nice picture of one of the windows. I read a recent account of a group who conducted a seance in this space, in this bloody chapel, and the person telling the story said that her group was conducting protectionary prayers sort of at the beginning of whatever it was they were up to there. They were in the chapel, and they were all holding hands, and they all had their eyes closed, but something made her open her eyes, and when she did, she saw the face of a man with wild red hair mere inches away from her face, screaming directly at her. Okay, she just didn't say that she heard anything, but can you imagine opening your eyes and having some crazy guy with red hair screaming like 2 inches from your face? Jesus, Mary, and all the saints. Okay, she then reported that moments later, the person that was heading up the session audibly told a spirit, "Don't get up into my face like that." So she took that too as confirmation that they were seeing the same thing as her. So perhaps this was a ghost of Thaddeus, or the ghost of one of the other plethora of people who were murdered at Lep Castle. And remember, the entrance to the oubliette is located in the bloody chapel. And one can imagine any number of prisoners pleading for their lives as they were being thrown down onto those up-ended spikes in that murder hole. And let us not forget all of those McMahon nobles who supposedly ended up inside the oubliettes. Okay, let me zoom a little bit, make this a little bigger. Okay, so that leads us to what is being called the murder hole room. Now, the location of the murder hole room, or it's also called the muckle room, is hotly contested, and it's very confusing. Reports place it in both the north wing and the south wing, both destroyed areas of the castle. Other reports indicated that it is in fact the oubliette and not separate location at all. Traditionally, a murder hole is located near the main entrance and serves as a defensive spot from which to launch harmful objects down upon the heads of attackers. So wherever the actual location, it's clear that the room was in use during the residence of Mildred Darby. And from my reading, I'm inclined to believe that this room was located in the northern wing on the eastern side. So let's see, that would be like the back corner over here. This is the northern side, and the east is this direction, looking towards the mountains. The front of the castle faces west, so I think we're probably talking about, it was one of the rooms right up against the main keep in this section, probably the one in the back. That's just my guess, based off of all the crazy stuff I have read. It's just so hard to determine exactly where it is. Okay, so so again, in the Kilman Castle article, Mildred Darby related that a visitor who stayed overnight in the muckle room, the murder hole room, asked to be moved into rooms facing west, current day front facade, as his lodgings in the muckle room faced east, looking towards the Schlev Bloom. Okay, so great. I had, in perfect dyslexic form, I had it absolutely backwards. So that would mean I had the right side, but it would be on the west. It would be here in the west, not over in the back. Okay. Either way, I'm pretty sure it's one of the rooms in this wing, in the northern wing. Okay, so that's my guess. So there's an account told in Mildred's own words, and this is another excerpt from the Kilman Castle article in Occult Times. Okay, quote, I put my hand out of bed, snapping my fingers to call Nell, my terrier. My hand was suddenly in the grasp of another hand, a soft, cool hand at a temperature perceptibly below my own flesh. To say I was astonished would but mildly convey my feelings. After a few seconds of steady pressure, the other hand let go, and almost simultaneously I heard a heavy sliding fall, like the collapse of a large body at the foot of my bed. Then, in the absolute stillness of the room, there sounded a deep human groan and some half-articulated words, or to be accurate, prayers. People have complained before. In fact, we don't generally put anyone in there now. The room is called the Muckle or Murder Hole Room, and the story goes that the stain on the floor is the blood of a man stabbed there by his brother. Two O'Carrolls quarreled over the ownership of the castle. The room had been disused for 50 years or more when we did it. The stain had been planed off of the board several times, but it always comes again, creeps up from below in a few hours. Wow, okay. That's crazy. Okay, so here we have some history confusion. She says, two O'Carrolls quarreled over the ownership of the castle. Well, it says a man had stabbed his brother in the room, and does not that sound like the story of Thaddeus and Tege, Koyak, the one-eye? I just feel like the stories are really, really getting confused here. But what we can at least know, because the blood crept up through the boards and couldn't be planed off, that it was for sure in one of these destroyed wings of the castle. And here is a photo of, this is the murder hole room at Shanclen na Blarney Castle, and you can see here like what its purpose is. It's just an open hole where defenders of the castle would stand, and they could shoot arrows down on the heads of potential invaders, or dump hot oil or whatever they had. They could just defensively pummel people from above here. So I just wanted you guys to see what a murder hole looked like. Okay. So that's pretty crazy, the murder hole room. Alright. The next portion I'm calling Seeing Red. Okay. Because these are 3 accounts and they all deal with color red. Okay. So there are various accounts of the ghosts of 2 women, one with a red cloth over her face and one in a red dress, seen to be holding a dagger. They are presented as 2 different apparitions. However, it may also be just as possible that these are manifestations of the same spirit appearing in different situations to different viewers. Okay. So the first one we're going to talk about is the murdered woman. Mildred Darby described this ghost in the Occult Times article as a woman with very few clothes and a red cloth over her face. She screams loudly twice and disappears. Okay. Another account from Mildred claims that while exiting her governess's rooms near the back staircase, which I believe this to be, she saw this spirit come up the stairs and felt a wave of bitter cold as it passed her by. The spirit walked past her to a window on the landing and then with a shriek fell heavily. Where did she fall? I don't know. It doesn't give us that information. Mildred insinuates that she had seen a reenactment of 2 O'Carroll brothers. I have no idea how she knows this. Fighting over a woman who is chased along the gallery and then stabbed, at which point all 3 disappear. And during this reenactment episode, the entire keep is brightly lit up. So, I mean, it's like living in the haunted castle at Disneyland. This is crazy. The amount of stuff that goes on in this castle. The brightly lit up keep. Women in red running around screaming and being murdered. Okay, now let's talk about the other lady in red. And that would be the Red Lady. Woman in red. This is the best I could do for you, Incogweirdos. No, I just liked it, so I throw it in there. So, is the Red Lady the same as the murdered woman? I don't know. Let's find out, see what you think. During the tenure of Mildred and John Darby, the specter of a tall woman dressed in red has been reported more than once by different witnesses. She's said to be carrying a raised dagger in a defensive posture. A bright light is seen to emanate from within her, and a frigid cold aura accompanies her, and it is reported to permeate the heart. Mildred described her as follows. There is a tall, dark woman in the historic scarlet silk dress that rustles. She haunts the blue room, which always used to be the nursery, and sobs at the foot of the children's beds. That's sad. Lep.net tells an uncredited, as in he didn't, like, whoever wrote it didn't footnote where this story comes from, and that's what I mean by uncredited. So Lep.net tells an uncredited story that this woman is thought to have been an O'Carroll captive who was raped and later gave birth. For reasons unknown, the baby was killed, and the woman in red committed suicide utilizing the blade she's always seen carrying, and having her weep at the bed of the children would also sort of follow. Here is an account of the same apparition given by one of Mildred Darby's overnight guests at Lep. Names are changed in this account to protect the anonymity of the Darbys in the Lep castle. Quote, during the night, the time was 12:45 a.m., as I was subsequently saw by my watch, I felt that I was awakened by somebody in my room. It was pitch dark, and at first I could see nothing. I was wide awake with an extraordinary cold feeling at my heart that rapidly increased in intensity. Almost immediately I felt, as much as saw, that there was a tall figure in the middle of the room. My first impression was that O'Connell himself was there, and by that I think, he means Jonathan Darby. As no other members of the household would correspond to the height. "What is it?" I asked. There was no answer, but now I could see dimly at first and with increasing distinctness that the tall figure was clothed from head to foot in red, with its right hand raised menacingly in the air. To my utter astonishment, I could see that the light which illuminated the figure was from within, having very much the effect of the dark lantern used in a photographer's room. As a figure advanced towards me, the light increased, and I could see distinctly that it was a form of a very tall woman holding some sort of weapon, knife or dagger, in her hand. "What is it?" I asked again, adding, "Who is it?" and then hurriedly struck a match and lit my candle. As the flame of the match and the candle illuminated the room, I looked around. The room was empty. Wow. Okay, so this ghost seems very distinct and intent on manifesting in a very similar way to several people. So this, to me, sounds like a stone tape from a traumatic event at the castle. I think we could pretty safely ascribe the lady in red, the woman in red, to a stone tape repeating phantasm, Ghostbusters fans. Okay. And Seeing Red story number 3, the Redcoats. I just thought this was a pretty good description. Very, very short little blurb here. During the visit of an investigator, I don't know if this was a psychic or otherwise, 2 soldiers in red coats were seen breaking a woman's arm. There is no description of the woman. There's no description of where the sighting took place, outside or inside the castle. But there you go. Red coats breaking a woman's arm. All right, let's talk about the McMahons, shall we? And there's their crest. You may remember this from last video. So around the period of 1591, members of the McMahon clan had been enlisted to fight as mercenaries against the O'Carrolls' then rivals, the Earls of Tyrone. To avoid having to pay these retainers, it's told that Charles O'Carroll instead had them slain either by poison or by strangulation, or both. Poison them first, they fall asleep, and then you strangle them. The numbers of dead in the incidents vary. Some reports claim 150 McMahons and a few O'Carrolls. Other accounts flip that and claim a few or up to 40 McMahon nobles and 150 O'Carrolls. I think that the figure of 150 likely comes from the estimation of bodies found within the oubliette when it was uncovered in the post-1922 burning renovations. There's also a similar mass murder story involving O'Neills instead of McMahons. So mass murder at Lep was nothing uncommon, people. All right, so have we here. This is an alternate view of the Great Hall. So in any event, what comes forward to us are tales of a large number of these warrior spirits haunting the Great Hall, seen here, which shares a wall with the oubliette, as well as the bloody chapel itself, wherein lies the entrance to the oubliette. So the bloody castle, I think, is above the Great Hall, and the entrance to the oubliette is up there in the bloody chapel, and then when you dropped the prisoners down into it, wall shared one of these walls with the dining hall. This previous report of the screaming red-headed ghost in the bloody chapel may very well stem from these murderous incidents. I could very well imagine that ghost being screaming as he's being forced into the bottleneck of the oubliette. And again, that's a picture of the bloody castle. Okay, moving forward in time, these incidences, these ghosts we're thinking probably come from the 1600s-ish. Okay? Both of these ghosts are discussed with great specificity. Their names, Emily and Charlotte. Ages and physical characteristics seem to be well known. So these two little girls must be seen fairly frequently. However, nowhere could I find any historical reference of these children or who their parents were. It's not uncommon that female children of this era might not be included in a list of heirs at this time. Only males could inherit. So Emily and Charlotte are put around the area when the last O'Carrolls were living, or in a time period when the last O'Carrolls lived at Lep, and the first Darbys lived at Lep. So that's kind of like the time period. They're not sure if Emily and Charlotte were O'Carrolls or Darbys. Okay. All right. So thought to be the two daughters of some of the, either the last O'Carrolls or the first Darbys. The ghosts of these children reportedly haunt the main hall and the nearby stairwell. Okay. In these places, they have been observed playing, laughing, and crying. And I don't know where the stairs are, but I'm assuming this is the stairwell right here. The story goes that Emily died after a fall from the southeastern battlements. Okay, wait, let me go back. All right, let's try to figure this out. Southeastern battlements. Okay, so we know that the castle faces west, and this is a southern portion. So either she fell from the back of this wing, or all the way up here at the back side where it drops off steeply downhill. Okay. So the story goes that Emily died after falling from the southeastern battlements. Okay, more than one visitor from the castle has seen a child falling from this spot only to disappear before hitting the ground. Sorry, I'm going to go back to the castle. Okay. The Ryans have claimed to have heard the screams of a child abruptly cutting out on numerous occasions. The ghost that is called Charlotte, and they believed her to be 6 years old, appears with a deformed right leg which is almost completely turned backwards, which she drags along behind her. Mildred Darby encountered the ghost of a child at Lep and described her as such. Another night I was sleeping with my little girl. I awoke and I saw a girl with long, fair hair standing at the fireplace. This is the fireplace right here. One hand at her side and the other on the chimney piece. Thinking at first it was my little girl, I felt on the pillow to see if she were gone, but she was fast asleep. There was no fire or light of any kind in the room. Okay, so that's consistent with those girls being seen mostly in the Great Hall. Okay, all right, let's talk about stories of the governess and the old man. These are pictures of murals at Lep. I just thought they were super cool. Look at the woman's hair. Isn't it crazy? It looks like snakes. It probably means something, but I don't know what it means. Interesting. This guy's falconing. He's going a falconing. These look like hawk feathers. Very cool. Okay, sorry. Don't really get too many good pictures of those, so I just wanted to include those here. The governess, the old man, and woman. Okay. In relation to Emily and Charlotte, a woman outfitted in Victorian dress is sometimes seen in the company of Emily and Charlotte. The spirit is presumed to have been their governess. Reportedly, she is seen most frequently by contemporary visitors. Two friends of the Ryans saw her walk diagonally across the main hall as they had their lunch there. All right. Mildred further described sighting an old man and woman described as follows. There is a little old man with a green cutaway coat, knee breeches, and bright shoe buckles, holding a leathern bag in his hand, sometimes seen with a little old woman with skinny hands, long black mitts, old-fashioned dress, and a big headdress. Both are sometimes seen with an old man dressed like a priest with an intensely cunning face. The green old man tries to stop people. Interesting. He must have worked in the castle. This is what I imagine the old man and lady to look like. And this is a lovely painting called Old Couple at a Coffee Table and Reading a Newspaper by Eugenio Zamfighi. Very beautiful. All right. Now let's talk about the priest house. Here it is. This is the facade of it. Clearly burned. A burned out shell has not been restored. The priest house is located on the north side of the main keep at Lep. It was burned out in the 1922 raids on Lep by locals, potentially spurred on by the IRA. I'm sorry, I forgot to say that last time because I really wanted to say that it is speculated that the locals had pressure put upon them by the Irish Republican Army to conduct the burning of Lep, so it's unclear whether they were willing or unwilling participants, and that's just, that's an important piece of history, and I apologize for not saying that last time. Okay. But even prior to the time of the priest house being burnt, it had already had a reputation for being haunted. Okay, so the spectral figure of a monk with cowl and tonsure has been reported to be seen on numerous occasions, entering into the priest's house through a window and continuing through the structure and exiting out another window on the opposite side. That kind of indicates to me that those windows were actually doorways in a different time period. I thought at first that this was the ruins of the priest house, but the more I look at it, I think this is probably the ruin of the wing, and then the priest house is like attached to it over here. That's what I'm thinking. The photos are not marked or not, described very well, so it's kind of a bunch of guesswork. The image of a heavy-set man is described as wearing rough clothing, thus thought to be a peasant. He rolls a presumably heavy barrel up the stairs at the back wing near the servant's bedroom in Sisyphus fashion. Once he gets to the top, the barrel rolls down the stairs and disappears. That is crazy. I mean, for something like that to be stuck in the stone tape, to like repeat as a stone tape recording, a memory, something that's strong enough to imprint upon the quartz in the stone of this castle. This incident must have been a very famous one in the life of Lep Castle, and it was either the dude got hellaciously angry and spilt blood ensued, as would be pretty typical for Lep Castle, or it was just like seen as some hilarious incident that was talked about over and over again. I just, there's got to be some reason why why that incident imprinted so strongly on the castle. It's just kind of interesting. Okay, so here's what I think we were seeing in the previous. I think we were looking down into the ruins of the wing, and here's the priest house, like attached to this wing. So I'm pretty sure that's what we were looking at. So during the time of the Darbys, the priest's house was still in use. Guests staying over in these rooms reported the sensation of a heavy individual laying down next to them, up against them, and snoring. Ignoring ghosts. It's like, hey, you're in my bed, bruh. Move over. I'm tired from all the praying and trying to scrub the blood off the altar. Or guests also reported, and more disturbingly, and I can definitely comment that this is disturbing, the feeling of a heavy body laying on top of them and pressing them down into the mattress. So not exactly, these are not giving reports of like incubus or succubus activity. Simply whoever this individual is and whatever this stone tape is, this person is sleeping must have been very important to this person, and he just keeps coming back to bed and laying down, and if there's somebody there, he's either laying up against them or he's laying on top of them. That's kind of what I'm getting from this story. The Ryans, the current owner's website, reports that shadowy figures are still being seen in the shell of the priest house, and the Ryans and guests have reported hearing chanting coming from the direction of the priest house, but when the sound is mentioned, the chanting ceases. So this is why I'm wondering if like the chanting heard outside has to do with the priest house and not with druids, as I spoke about at the beginning of the episode. Okay, so let's talk about a Darby ghost, shall we? Le Capitaine. Alright, the third of the Darbys to inhabit Lep Castle was Captain Jonathan Darby, and supposedly he buried the family treasure at Lep Castle throughout the estate. However, he got charged with treason, and it saw him imprisoned in Dublin. Okay, so that made me wonder, where would he have been imprisoned? Alright, so that's what this map is showing. Okay, this right here, Mount Brown, would have been the area of the prison that was existent at the time, but then there was another prison built right over here, and that's the Brehon Kilmainen, which is now a museum, by the way. But so he was either here at Mount Brown or here at Brehon Kilmainen. Okay, so he escaped his treason sentence of being hung and then drawn and quartered, and was released some years later after being pardoned by William of Orange. However, the experience really took its toll on him, and when he got back to Lep Castle, he could not remember where the treasure was, and he spent the rest of his life going around the estate trying to find the treasure. The secret, forgotten, forgotten by him, was taken to his grave, and supposedly his ghost can still be seen wandering around Lep looking for the treasure. Okay, so this is, they couldn't find any images of the old prison, but by all accounts it was an inhumane place, and that is why Prison Kilmainen was built, and it's about 1.5 kilometers west of the old prison site. And here's the exterior of it, and as I said, it is a museum now. And get ready for what it looks like inside, kids, because this prison was built to be more humane and to give prisoners separate lodgings instead of them all being thrown into a common area. And here's the inside. Whoa! Not too shabby, Incogweirdos. I mean, if you gotta be in a prison, hey, it's kind of beautiful. I'm very impressed. I think it's gorgeous. Okay, not too shabby. Alright, so he could have been in there. He very well could have been, Captain Darby very well could have been imprisoned here. Okay. Alright, kids, so, alright, so now we're getting up to 20th century and the restoration efforts. Okay, so here is a photo of Lep taken in 1919. So here it is, completely 100% restored condition with, you can see the priest's house is 100% there. The wings, the windows are in the wings. There's no crumbling crenellations. It's all in spickety-span shape. Okay? So both Sean Ryan and the previous owner before him, Peter Bartlett, had experienced bizarre poltergeist activity during their restorations. Peter himself was not specific, but friends of his mentioned an incredible amount of poltergeist activity that occurred during his time undergoing renovations. Now, Sean, poor Mr. Ryan, has had some stuff happen to him during renovations. He talks about his tools being moved to the far corners of the room when he turned his back, and a carpenter that he employed suddenly left and never came back and wouldn't give any reasons why. During Sean's renovation efforts, they were suddenly stopped when the ladder he was working from was pushed away from the wall, forcing him to jump several stories, fracturing his knee. Holy cow, Sean. And upon resuming to work, another incident resulted in a broken ankle. Wow. Okay. I have definitely heard that spirits don't like renovations. And, I mean, the Darbys did a whole bunch of renovations prior to the burning, and that's why a lot of people think that all the spirits of this castle got stirred up in the first place. So, Sean, I'm very sorry to hear, Sean, that you were actually injured twice, quite severely, while doing renovations. And, you know, I would say at this point, you're good, brah. You've done a great job. I wouldn't worry too much about getting those wings in the bloody chapel and the priest house done. Holy cow. How, you know, don't want to break any more bones, and we don't want anything more serious to happen to you, Sean, so take care of yourself out there at Lep. Okay, so if you guys are interested in present-day encounters at Lep Castle, let me tell you, there are tons of them out there on the internet. Just Google it. Veritable cornucopia of videos of everyday folk and paranormal investigators alike having freaky incidences that happen to them at LEP. I mean, it's out there, kids, and it's easy to find. So if you want to know more, dive into the interwebs and have a good time with people getting scared at LEP Castle. All right. Well, gosh, guys. Oh, this is LEP after the burning. So as you can see, crumbled rock and the windows are busted open and such. Okay. And here is LEP as it appears in 2025 with this area has not been renovated. The priest's house, this side has. Very nice. Okay, be careful, Sean. We don't want you to have any more injuries. Okay, guys, well, thank you so much for being here with me today for this video about the paranormal activity at LEP Castle. I hope that you had a good time, and I'm really glad that you stopped by. We love seeing you here at terraincogweirdo. So please join us next time, my beautiful dears, for something inevitably weird. Alright? Here on Terra, Incogweirdo, the land where para is normal. Alright, guys, thanks again. I love you, and we'll see you next time. Slan go fall, my beautiful Incogweirdos. Slan go fall. Bye.